My family handed my grandmother's ring to my sister-in-law while I was sitting right there at the table, not behind my back, not while I was out of the room. Right there, in front of me, like I was furniture. I'm a financial analyst. I've been supporting myself since I was 22 and quietly helping my parents since I was 24. Not loudly. Not in a way that ever made it feel like a transaction. I paid for things because they needed help and I had the means, and I thought that was just what family did. My younger brother, he never had the same stability I did. He bounced between jobs, moved back home twice, married young. My parents worried about him constantly in a way they never seemed to worry about me. I used to tell myself that was a compliment, that they trusted me to be fine. I know better now. The ring had belonged to my grandmother. It wasn't flashy. A simple gold band with a small diamond cluster, the kind that was made in the 1950s when things were built to last. My grandmother wore it every day of her adult life. When she passed 3 years ago, she didn't leave a formal will. There wasn't much to divide, but she had told my mother more than once that the ring was meant for me. I was the one who visited her every Sunday. I was the one who drove her to her cardiology appointments when my parents couldn't. I was the one who held her hand during her last week in the hospital while my brother sent a card. My mother knew this. She acknowledged it once, not long after the funeral, when I asked gently what would happen to the ring. She said, "Of course it's yours, honey. Grandma wanted you to have it." And I believed her. I stopped thinking about it. That was my first mistake. The dinner happened on a Saturday in late October. My parents had invited the whole family over, me, my brother, his wife. It was supposed to be a birthday dinner for my dad, nothing elaborate. I brought a bottle of wine he'd mentioned wanting to try and a card with a check inside because that's the kind of daughter I am, the kind who pays attention to small things. We were between the main course and dessert when my mother got up and came back to the table holding a small velvet box. I recognized it immediately. My heart did something strange. Not quite a lurch, more like a pause. She walked past me and set it down in front of my sister-in-law. "We've been holding on to this," my mother said, "and we think it should go to someone who really put it to use. You two are building a life together, and we want you to have it." My sister-in-law opened the box and her eyes went wide. My brother reached over and squeezed her hand. There was clapping. There was laughter. My dad raised his glass. I sat there with a smile on my face that I do not know how to explain to you. It was the kind of smile that happens when your body decides to protect you from something before your brain has finished processing it. I picked up my fork. I ate a bite of something I didn't taste. I nodded when someone said something to me, and somewhere under all of that, something very quiet and very certain came apart. I didn't say anything that night. I drove home in silence and I sat in my parking garage for a long time before going inside. I wasn't crying. I was trying to locate the feeling, the way you press on a bruise to understand where exactly the damage is. And what I found, when I finally got honest with myself, was that this wasn't really about the ring. The ring was just the moment I couldn't explain away anymore. Let me tell you about the pattern, because there was always a pattern. When my brother needed a security deposit for his first apartment at 25, my parents asked me if I could help cover it. I did. $4,000. They said he'd pay me back. He never did, and no one ever brought it up again. When they needed a new roof 2 years ago and their home warranty didn't cover the full amount, I wrote a check for $3,200. I didn't ask for anything in return. When my sister-in-law had a baby shower and my mom decided it should be held at a venue instead of the house, she called me and said, "You're so good at this kind of thing and we just want it to be special." I planned it. I paid for most of it. I spent 3 weekends on it. My brother's wife thanked my mother in her speech. None of these things on their own would have broken me. But they built up the way sediment builds, quietly, steadily, until one day you realize you're standing at the bottom of something. After the ring dinner, I went quiet for a week. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text my brother. I needed to think without anyone's voice in my ear telling me I was overreacting. Because I knew that voice was coming. It always came. I spent that week going back over the years in my head with a kind of ruthless accounting I'd never let myself do before. Every check, every favor, every weekend given over to someone else's emergency. Every time I'd been thanked in the abstract, we don't know what we'd do without you, without anyone ever actually asking whether I was okay or what I needed or whether any of this was costing me something. I also thought about my grandmother. I thought about those Sunday visits, the ones I made because I wanted to, because I loved her, not as a transaction. But she had seen me. She had explicitly said she wanted me to have that ring. And my parents had taken that wish and handed it to someone else, without a conversation, without a warning, without even the basic courtesy of a private word to me beforehand. The thing that kept surfacing was not why did they do this, but they didn't even think they needed to explain it. That was the part that mattered. I was so reliable, so settled, so fine, that my feelings had become an afterthought. I called my mother 11 days after the dinner. I had decided by then that I wasn't going to perform emotions I didn't feel, and I wasn't going to make it bigger than it needed to be. I was going to be direct. I told her I was hurt about the ring. I told her about the conversation we'd had after the funeral, what she had said to me, what I had taken that to mean. I told her I wished she had spoken to me before making that decision. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't think it would be this important to you." I asked her why she thought that. She said, "You've never been the type to care about things like that." I let that sit there between us for a second. I've never been the type to care about things. Said about the daughter who drove her mother to every appointment, wrote the checks, planned the parties, showed up for every Sunday visit without fail. The daughter who apparently cared so little about things that she had faded, in her own family's mind, into a function rather than a person. I said, "Mom, I care about this." She said she'd talk to my brother and see if maybe they could get a replica made or figure something out. Something. I told her I didn't want a replica. I told her what I wanted was for them to have talked to me first. She shifted then. Her voice changed in that way it does when she decides a conversation has gotten uncomfortable enough to end. She said, "I hope you're not going to make this into a whole thing. Your brother's been going through a lot." I told her I understood that. I also told her that I had been going through things for a long time without it ever prompting that same consideration in return. She didn't have a response to that. We ended the call in a way that wasn't a fight but wasn't resolution either. That specific, exhausting neutral zone that families live in when everyone knows the truth, but no one wants to say it plainly. 2 weeks later, my parents called to ask me if I could help cover a car repair for my brother. The transmission had gone out on his truck. The estimate was around $3,400. My dad said, we wouldn't ask if we had another option. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said no. Just that? No. My dad said, "Sorry?" I said, "I'm not going to be able to help with this one." There was a pause, a long one. And in that pause, I could feel the reorganization happening on the other end of the line, the recalculating, the trying to understand why the reliable one was suddenly not being reliable. My dad said they'd figure it out. He sounded stiff. We said goodbye. I hung up and I felt something I wasn't expecting. Not guilt. Not relief, exactly. More like the feeling of putting down something heavy that you'd been carrying so long you forgot you were carrying it. My brother called me the next day. He said he wasn't sure what was going on with me lately, but that it seemed like I was going through something. He asked if I was okay. And here's the thing, it was the first time in years anyone in my family had asked me that question first, before asking me for something. I almost told him everything. But he followed it up with, "I just want to make sure you're in a good headspace because Mom and Dad are pretty stressed about the truck thing." There it was. I told him I was fine. I told him I needed some time. I told him I loved him and I meant it because I do. I love all of them. That's the part that makes this hard and not simple. But love doesn't mean making yourself into an ATM. Love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be so thoroughly taken for granted that you disappear. I didn't send money for the truck. They found another way, because people always do when they have no other option. My mother and I had 2 more conversations in the following month. Both of them circled around what had happened without landing on it. She said things like, "I just want everyone to get along," and "family is complicated." I stopped offering the reassurances I used to give automatically, the "I know, Mom," and "it's fine," and "I'm not trying to make a big deal of this." I just listened and said what I actually thought, which was measured and calm and honest, and that alone seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. My dad sent me a text at some point that said, "We appreciate everything you do for this family." Past tense implied, I noticed, like an appreciation for what I used to do. I thought about my grandmother a lot during this period. I thought about how she always noticed me, really noticed me, in the way that made you feel seen rather than surveyed. She would have hated how this played out. She was a woman who said what she meant. She raised my mother, and somehow my mother had grown into someone who said what was convenient instead. I started setting aside the money I would have otherwise given to family requests. Not a lot at first. A few hundred here, a few hundred there. And then I looked at a year's worth of it and understood for the first time, with real numbers in front of me, how much of my own security and future I had been quietly routing toward people who didn't notice it enough to return the basic dignity of being considered. I didn't make a scene. I didn't send an email listing every grievance. That was never going to be my style, and it isn't now. What I did was simpler and, I think, more final. I stopped performing the role I'd been assigned. I stopped being the one who called first. I stopped volunteering solutions. When family gatherings came up, I came if I wanted to, and I was warm and present when I was there. But I stopped bending my schedule around everyone else's needs. I stopped offering money before I was asked, and when I was asked, I said no without elaborate explanation. What surprised me was how visible this made me, suddenly. My mother started calling more often, not to ask for anything, at first, just to talk. My dad mentioned once, awkwardly, that he felt like I seemed different. My brother texted to say he hoped things were okay between us. The version of me who was always available, always contributing, always quietly absorbing whatever the family needed, that version had apparently been a kind of wallpaper, something people only noticed when it was gone. There was one conversation with my mother, about 3 months after the ring dinner, that I keep coming back to. She called on a Sunday evening and we talked for an hour, which was longer than we'd talked in years. And at the end, she said something that cracked something open a little. She said, "I think I've always just assumed you were okay because you never told us you weren't." I thought about that for a long time. She wasn't wrong. I had been so determined to be the capable one, the low-maintenance one, the one who didn't need anything, that I had made it genuinely easy to overlook me. That wasn't entirely their failure. Some of it was mine. I had never asked them to see me because I decided somewhere along the way that asking was a vulnerability I couldn't afford. But here's what I also know, that understanding doesn't erase the ring. It doesn't ungive the security deposit my brother never repaid, or the baby shower I planned, or the years of showing up. Understanding why something happened doesn't mean it was okay. The ring is still at my brother's house. My sister-in-law wears it sometimes. I've seen it. I don't bring it up anymore, not because I've forgiven the carelessness of it, but because I've made peace with what it meant. It was the moment I finally understood that being relied on and being valued are not the same thing. That being capable doesn't protect you from being taken for granted. If anything, it accelerates the process. I have not written a check for my family since that October dinner. That is not a permanent decision. It's just where I am right now while I figure out what a different kind of relationship with them looks like. One where I'm a person they consider rather than a resource they access. My grandmother would have said, very simply, that I should have spoken up sooner. She was probably right. She always was. I don't know exactly what comes next. My mother and I are in a different place than we were. Closer in some ways. More honest. Still navigating. My brother and I are finding our way. My dad still doesn't say much, but he called on my birthday this year before anyone reminded him, which was new. None of this is resolved. That's what real life looks like, I think. Not clean endings, but slow adjustments, small recalibrations, the gradual work of asking to be seen instead of just hoping you will be. I stopped hoping. I started asking. And whatever this new version of my family looks like, at least it will be built on something real. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain. I know that. I stopped sending money. I stopped calling first. I said no to a car repair for my brother and watched my parents reorganize themselves around the silence I left. From the outside, that probably looks like coldness, or stubbornness, or a daughter who decided to make everything hard. But here's what I've come to understand about that October dinner, about the ring, about all the years that came before it. What happened to me wasn't a single bad decision my parents made. It was the result of a long, quiet agreement we had all made together. One I never consciously signed but upheld every single time I wrote a check without being asked. Every time I said, "It's fine," when it wasn't. Every time I made myself smaller so the people around me could feel more comfortable. I was the one who taught them that I didn't need to be considered. That's a hard thing to sit with. It would have been easier to stay angry at them and only them. But the honest accounting, the kind I finally did that week after the dinner, alone in my apartment with a legal pad and too much coffee, showed me my own handwriting all over the arrangement. I had confused being needed with being loved. I had mistaken reliability for reciprocity, and every time I absorbed a cost without naming it, I reinforced in my family's mind that I was fine, always fine, structurally incapable of needing anything. The ring was just the first thing I couldn't rationalize. What I had to learn, and I mean really learn it, not just understand it intellectually but feel it in the way I made decisions, was that being a good person doesn't require being a limitless resource. Integrity isn't the same as self-erasure. You can be someone who shows up, who gives genuinely, who loves without conditions, and still have the right to say, "This is costing me something and I'm going to name that now." That's not selfishness. That's clarity. And clarity, I found, is one of the hardest things to hold on to when you've spent years building an identity around being the easy one. The other thing I had to reckon with was smarter about how I love people going forward. Not colder, smarter. There's a difference between generosity and people-pleasing, and I had spent a long time dressing the second one up as the first. Real generosity comes from a full place. It comes from someone who has looked at what they have and consciously decided to share it. What I was doing was coming from a depleted place and pretending I had plenty, because admitting I was running low felt like a failure. My grandmother was never like that. She gave because she wanted to, clearly and openly, and she also knew when to hold her ground. She said what she meant. She didn't make herself easy to overlook. I think about her a lot now, not with grief exactly, but with a kind of recognition, like I'm finally growing into something she already understood. What I know now that I didn't know then is that the people who love you correctly will not crumble when you take up space. My mother and I are still finding our way to something more honest. My brother called on my birthday without prompting. These are small things, but they are real things, and they happened only after I stopped making my own absence easy to miss. I stopped hoping to be seen. I started requiring it. That, more than anything, is what the ring actually gave me.